Good morning. Hello, everyone. Ed Nile here, author of the Iron Shield Chronicles. And again, all six books currently of that series are out on Amazon and Kobo. Pick up Iron Strife. Pick up, some of the others. You can also get big mega pack on Kindle, about $5. And I feel the need to point out that in the case of Iron Exiles and Iron Revolt, these ones are both numbered in the series because of where they chronologically fit, but they are standalones. Lots of people bought Iron Exiles, originally under its old title, Old Bolts, as a standalone book and enjoyed it for that. It does make reference to the broader series, but it is more or less a self-contained story, though the characters do come up later. And it's one of my favorite ones that I've written. So if that interests you, you can always go pick this up. And I don't talk a lot about Iron Revolt, even though it was the most, before I re-released the series, it was the most recent one I've written. And this is one of my favorites, though, because this one was heavily inspired by my reading of Zulu history. And I kind of have, I have this Zulu-inspired clan of warriors that ride giant warthogs mounted with machine guns fighting mechs. I mean, it's a lot of fun. It's, again, kind of more of a standalone, a bit of a chunky boy, too. And if either of those sound interesting, or you want to just start at the beginning, again, Iron Strife, Iron Valor, with the plug out of the way. Sorry, I'm gonna plug. I gotta plug the books. I'm a writer first, YouTuber second. With the plugs out of the way, I am going to talk today about this topic that's been coming up at my writing groups on and off, and something that I've discovered throughout my writing. As some of y'all will know, I am working on an epic fantasy, Godless, book 1 of the Daedra cycle, cover here. And I've been doing some chapter rewrites, taking some stuff from my handwritten first draft and transcribing it, and finding that I have to, there's always that case where you realize there's something that is just like there's a bit off. You have to put in more sensory detail. You have to make some fundamental changes based on later revisions that essentially mean a chapter rewrite. And so one chapter is getting expanded to 3, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of cool world building aspects, a lot of characters being introduced in this kind of Council of Elrond type big gathering decision making scene. And I hate trying to get into those, especially anything dialogue heavy, where there's just so much potential to go off into tangents, where you're kind of doing exposition while you're performing dialogue, and that dialogue, you go off on these random tangents, and you end up lost, and your characters are talking about something that has nothing to do with ultimately what they need to be, what is relevant to the story. I feel like later books in the Wheel of Time, before Robert Jordan, sadly passed, I try and get into like books, 5 through 7 of that series. Even as a teenager, I kind of was reading this and I'm like, there is a lot of stuff here that is just not really fun or engaging to read about. Just people arguing about their dietary preferences. And if it's once or twice, but when it's an entire, chapter's worth of stuff that's basically just, it was a lot of it was just used to fill in time for like, big traveling sequences for characters. And, these were huge books. But like I read that guy go on about a freaking carpet in a bank teller's room for like 3 fucking pages. And so when it comes to that kind of, and that's not even dialogue, that's just in description, but dialogue I find is where I fall flat on this, where I get lost in the sauce a bit, and it's just like back and forth. Next thing you know, my characters are talking about something that has nothing to do with anything. So I thought I was going down that kind of a tangent with one of the harbingers of one of the deities in the pantheon of Zadra. And I kind of stumbled into the correct answer and realized that where this chapter was going, how it's going to fold into the overall events of the book. So I'm like, okay, rescued that, and I'm coming up to this point where there's these dialogue kind of revelations, these characters trying to make a decision whether to get involved in a conflict, and again I come to this same conclusion that I've come to before when it comes to dialogue, where you cannot have characters make their decisions based on conversations alone. In most fantasy and most sci-fi and most kind of, action-oriented kind of, it depends on what story you're writing. If you're writing a Star Trek type thing, Star Trek would solve a lot of problems with people talking and, basic diplomacy. It works for that. It doesn't necessarily work for the kind of pacing and the kind of stakes that I'm going for. You couldn't really apply that logic to something like Star Wars, for example, and even Lord of the Rings. If you look at the Council of Elrond, you have the council, you have all this talk back and forth about what happens. You have Gimli trying to destroy the ring. You have Frodo interrupting the flow of conversation because in reality, in real life, you are never going to convince someone through conversation alone that you're correct if they fully believe you're wrong. And you're never going to be convinced through someone just talking. Now, what happens, and what I find happens in life more or less, both for me and the people I know, is you talk to someone, you make your arguments, you disagree in the moment, something happens to them or to you that confirms what one of these people were saying, and then you change your mind based on that. Like, oh, Ed was right. Or, oh, Ed's friend, or like I'll be talking about my friend, oh, my friend was correct about that. That's how things click together. You have to have the argument, people making their points, and then that third thing that comes in and tips the scale. That's I find true of dialogue and decision making in fiction as well. If I'm trying to write an argument, if I'm trying to write a discussion, and I'm trying to just go with this person trying to convince someone to do something they would never do. I'm not talking about like pep talks, right? Like, a lot of fantasy will have the big inspirational pep talk. You have the Rohirrim being terrified of storming Mordor, and then Aragorn gives his big speech. No, that's people have already written out there. They've already decided to do. I'm talking about if you're having a character try to convince another character to do something that they would never do, having them talk them into it without some kind of external thing just does not, or it falls flat every time I've seen it, and it's pretty much a dead end, and it just always feels contrived. For example, in Iron Strife, I have one of my characters, Samuel Mutton, is pressured into doing something he would never do. He's pressured into attacking somewhere he would never attack and compromising his morals in these ways that he normally never would. What happens is during this conversation, he's also informed that his war suit has already been moved without his consent, and that if he doesn't go and do this, his war suit is lost to the enemy. Is lost to the enemy and is going to be turned against his own side. So it's like, hey, by the way, we've already moved it. It's either give up this very expensive, very prized machine to be used against your allies, or do this thing that you don't want to do, right? So you have the argument, you have the discussion, and then you have, oh, by the way. And I have this same thing in this sequence in Godless, and it's, you gotta know, like, how to do it. You can't use the same methodology, but having something just come in and interrupt the flow of the conversation, like Frodo standing up saying, "I will take it," in the Council of Elrond, it kind of stops everything, right? It's unexpected. It breaks the flow of things because everyone's just bickering. And a realistic kind of way of that happening would be very different. Like, eventually someone would, just, say, hey, everyone calm down. There'd be like this whole, that kind of conversation would run like so it would go for hours. It would be this long dragged out sequence, and in the end a lot of people would still disagree. You wouldn't reach that kind of decision. Whereas it's interesting how Tolkien kind of used Entmoot as a way of like discussing a way of showcasing a more quote unquote realistic way of for a decision to be made like that. And even in the middle of that, the decision that really changes the thing that really changes the minds of the Ents, especially in the movie version of Lord of the Rings, is seeing what Saruman has done to their their beloved trees, to their brethren, and drive and basically pushing them over that cliff. You have to have that exterior thing that drives people to make decisions. You can't do it from dialogue alone. And I make this mistake a lot in early drafts, and less often now, but especially before. I see a lot of people making this mistake in early drafts where they're like, yeah, this person just argues them into it, convinces them to go against their values, and it works out. And I've never seen it not kind of. Attack on Titan, the later seasons, is kind of bad for this, especially those later episodes where like so much stuff is just done through dialogue exposition without any added ingredients or elements to make it hit. And so you gotta remember, if you take anything away from this, before I get back to the writing, is that dialogue is important. Good dialogue is a valuable asset, and having people discuss things and argue things, it works. It's good for character development. It's good to showcase the differences between different characters. At the end of the think, would you be able to be convinced to turn away from a fundamental belief you have by conversation alone? Or would that conversation need and that person's points need to be backed up by something you observe in life? Apply that to your depending on what the answer is, apply that to your characters. I see that in life. Anytime I've been convinced, anytime I've convinced someone else of something else, it's been a combination of the points I make plus evidence, that they encounter on their own. It's been and in fiction, it's always that kind of external oomph that pushes people towards the decision they need to make for the story to progress, that proves the other character's argument. So that, with that being said, I'm Ed Nile. You can pick up the Iron Shield Chronicles on Amazon Kobo. You can look forward to Godless, which I hope to have out before the spring. And with that, good luck in your writing. Have a great rest of the week, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Cheers.